Thank you very much for coming, everybody. My name's Amanda, as Colin very kindly introduced me, and I've been working in the area of talent management for the last 20 years. And I was really interested in whether talent management has really got its future in organisations. Do organisations really know what they mean when they talk about talent management? It's a bit like OD. The terms OD and talent management, in my mind, get bandied around by HR professionals and even myself. And I was thinking, do we really know what we mean by talent management? Do we know how to define talent? And do organisations have a talent strategy? In 2001, McKinsey said that in order for organisations to have a talent mindset, they need to make sure that they're very, very clear about their talent strategy. They need to make sure that they develop the talent from within. And I thought, well, that would be great. So 10 years later, I decided to go out and assess whether that is actually the case. Have some of our leading brands, some of our leading global brands actually got a talent strategy? If they have got a strategy, do the business leaders know what it is? And do they know how to implement that strategy? When we were doing that, one of the big questions that kept getting raised, which is why I think you're here today, was competencies. How many of you here today, would you mind raising your hand if you have competency model in your organisation? Thank you. Quite a few of you still. Competencies is a debate we've had for years, and in the last year we've designed 12 behavioural models for organisations. Not one of them was a competency model. All of them were capability or strengths models. And it begs the question, what's the difference? And I was not that sure, and I call myself a relative expert, being in the industry for 20 years. And I was really keen to find out what organisations really think about talent, about competencies, and how they use them. So, is talent management nice to have, or is it business critical? If competencies are prevalent within 95% of the global organisations, how are they used? Are they successful? Are they important part of the talent management strategy? And does talent management enable organisations to differentiate themselves from other organisations? Does it enable them to be competitive, successful in terms of shareholding? What does it do? Does it actually make any difference to have a talent management strategy? What we did is we interviewed 150 business leaders, 50 who are HR directors, 50 talent directors, and 50 business leaders in order to identify what talent management really meant. We had those 150 leaders were from 85 organisations, 36 of them were agreed to have their name listed on the research. So you can see quite a few of them are global brands that we are used to either using as a customer or working with, or you may even be employed by. So I'd like to just stop right now and ask you all a question. When I asked my interviewees, do you have a clear definition of talent? What percentage of organisations do you think said, yes, we have a clear definition of talent? If you think it's less than 30%, would you like to raise your hand? Gosh, you're quite dark, aren't you? If you think it was less than 30 to 60%? And above 60%? Okay, so not that optimistic so far in the room. What about when I asked the questions, do you have a talent strategy? Do you think it was less than 30%? A few. 30 to 60? A few more. And plus 60. Okay, one. Very, very optimistic. What we found was that 68% have a talent strategy, but 41% of people do not understand it. So there is a strategy, but people are not clear what it is, what impact it's going to have, and what the differentiators are going to be for the organisation. 52% have a clear definition of talent. But that's amazing that I was talking to talent directors, and so many of those talent directors didn't have a clear definition of talent in their organisation. When we looked at the differences between talent, HR, and the business, you can see that the message is getting diluted. So talent are defining most of the time a really good model of talent. But the message is getting diluted when they're working with HR. HR are then not necessarily sharing the intricacies and complexities of the talent model to the business. When we went back to those clients and said, why is this? What's happening? There was an assumption between talent and HR that the business leaders don't want too much complexity. They want some simple stories. They like 9-box, or they use 9-box, and they want a simple methodology for defining, attracting, retaining, and developing talent. But when we interviewed the business leaders, they said, actually, we can handle some complexity. We are leaders. We'd like more detail. We'd like more information on how to ensure that we can attract, recruit, retain and develop the right talent in our organisation. We've just done another piece of research on the back of this, and we've been asking our talent leaders, what's the one question you're being asked by the business? And resoundingly, they're all asking, how do I identify my talent? And who is my talent? And I think that's amazing that we're still having this debate. We think that maybe the reason why talent strategies are not being as successful as they could be is because they're not embedded in organisations. Only 34% said their talent management strategy is embedded, so 66% said it isn't. And I wondered, why is that? I made an assumption going into those interviews that maybe leaders should be thinking about having a consistent strategy across the whole organisation. But many clients, global banks, challenged me and said, no, we don't want a consistent strategy. We want a clear strategy, but we don't necessarily want the same strategy for everybody. We want to make sure that we treat people as unique, as different, and that we account for all of the wealth of experience and expertise and the strengths of the people that come into the business. So what percentage of organisations do you think said that they openly communicated to their employees if they were talented or they're on a talent pipeline or agenda? Does anyone think it would be less than 50? Lots of nods. More than 50? Maybe 1 or 2 nods. 20% of organisations said that they openly communicated their talent strategy and that they were open about saying to people that they were talent. And it's almost like talent has become a dirty word. It's almost become that it's become whispered in the corridors. And we've almost become an agenda of hiding talent, hiding the talent agenda, rather than being proud about what we mean by talent and what we mean by potential. Keeping talent management strategies simple is fundamental to the success of a programme. And what's happened is many talent directors I interviewed said that we try to keep it simple and less than 7 points within any talent strategy. When we asked the HR directors what they would like, they said actually we can handle a bit of complexity, and when we asked the business, they said, look, we'd like to understand exactly what we need to do in order to attract, retain and develop our key people. So I think we shouldn't dumb it down. We shouldn't make messages so simple that we lose the wealth of data and information when we're talking about talent. What we found is 27% of organisations are moving from competency models to capability models. Is anyone here clear what the difference is between a competency model and a capability model? I ran an online chat, and we had a number of professors from a number of universities contribute to the online conversation about what is the difference. And by the end of that, and by the time of a number of Twitter conversations, I was way more confused than when I started. And I realised that's because it's very grey and we're not really very clear. And I personally think psychology can be a bit trendy and capability models are a bit trendy. And we are now shifting to competency to capability because capability appears to be harder, maybe a bit more rigid, maybe a bit more measurable. And in fact, are we really striving for that? Do we really want a model to do that, or do we want a model to be flexible? So what we have found is 52% are using both competency and capability models. They're using global competency models to define how we'd like to operate around here, and then functional capability models to define the skills, the knowledge, and the behavioural requirements within IT, HR, or a functional discipline. But doesn't that just confuse things? We also looked to see whether there was a difference between competency and capability models and the perception according to talent, HR, and the business. And you can see here from this story that it's really very positive that organisations, the leaders, believe competency models to be based on values, to be related to the brand, and that they describe the behaviours that are most valued by organisations. I think this is a really positive story, but are competencies enough? Should we be thinking also about values? Should we also be thinking about strengths? If you were going to hire someone into the organisation, I would suggest the first thing you need to do is to assess, do they have cultural fit? Will they fit in around here at an organisational level? Do they have the right values? Then the next question is, can they do the job? And that's capability. But the third question is, why are you going to hire them? Why that person? Why would you hire Colin, who's one of my colleagues, rather than another person? And that would be because of what excites you about them. That's their strengths, their energisers, what really motivates them and what really drives them at work. So I think that whilst competencies have had a great place in psychology and in industry for many years, I'm not sure they are enough now. They're just a starting point for a discussion. They're not the end of the discussion. When we interviewed the leaders about the talent models, what we found was that many of the talent models included values, capability measures, aspirations, and they looked at potential. What they didn't tend to do is look at emotional intelligence, social intelligence, or cognitive intelligence. And we would argue that that is central to any talent model. In order to define talent, you need to make sure that you're very clear about the capability, the IQ, the EQ, and the SQ, the social intelligence of the person that you're bringing in. And many models actually miss this. We also asked those leaders whether their talent management strategy was responsive to market conditions, or whether we, in theory, wondered whether they operate a little bit in isolation. And what we found is that 78% of the talent management strategies that were defined were responsive to market conditions. But when we probed further, what it really meant is, how much money have I got? It's based on the economy. It wasn't necessarily talking about what's happening in the economy, the politics, and so on. So it wasn't thinking about the macro drivers that are impacting talent. It was thinking purely about budget. And only 28% actually show explicitly in their talent strategy how they should be improving in comparison to their competitors. Very few looked outside of the organisation. Most of the talent strategies looked inwardly rather than externally. McKinsey in 2001 said the fundamental element of ensuring a talent mindset is to make sure you develop your talent from within. And with the recession and the economy over the last few years, organisations are doing that more than ever. They're making sure they develop talent from within. But the irony is that the last 5 organisations who approached me in order to do some consulting work, one of their major macro challenges is the lack of turnover. And that people are just not moving on, and they're not, as a result, getting enough creativity, enough new talent, enough new blood, and they're having a too stable workforce with turnovers of about 1 to 2% in some organisations. And it's creating a new sort of problem that we're not getting enough turnover, we're not getting enough talent, we're not getting enough creativity running through an organisation. So I wonder whether I need to challenge the McKinsey report that says in order to create a talent mindset we need to develop talent from within. Because maybe there's a point that you have to stop and bring new talent from outside. Many organisations are encouraging leaders to be unique and to be authentic and to act in line with their own norms and values. but they also want them to act in line with the organisational values. And for me, this was a bit of a contradiction. So you can do what you need to do as long as you do what I tell you to do first. And I was thinking, how are we communicating this to leaders? Is it confusing? Should we actually be being more explicit about what we expect of leaders in order to succeed? And I think when I went back to organisations and challenged them, they said, well, that's fine. Well, as long as we recruit them in and we know that they're going to toe the party line, deliver what they need to deliver, they can then be authentic and unique. But fundamentally, they have to follow the organisational values first. So I personally think there's a little bit of a contradiction in this. And the only way we can deal with it is to make sure we're truly explicit about what we require of leaders. We've seen from many of the stands and many of the talks that organisations have been moving over the last few years towards a spike-based profile or a strengths-based approach, and that we're moving more towards allowable weaknesses. We're not expecting everyone to get a 3 on an assessment centre anymore. We do allow weaknesses within organisations, and I think that's a great move, because what we should be recruiting people on, we should be developing and retaining people on, is strengths. Why that person? Why would you bring them in? And can you formulate a team around them which will help to combat any allowable weaknesses that they might have, rather than having a whole load of people who all achieved a 3 in an assessment centre. So what does the future look like? Consistently, those 150 people said that they need to focus more on talent management over the next 3 years, but they do not necessarily have the budget to do it. When we asked them, how do you prove the success of your talent management strategies to your shareholders, they looked a bit blank. And only 5% of the organisations we interviewed said that they actually measure the return on investment of their talent management strategies. And we asked them why not. And the answer? Too hard. Just too hard. We don't have the data. We're not really sure how we could do it. And then, of course, it's a vicious circle, because then they can't prove to the shareholders that talent management actually has a place, because they haven't proven that there is a financial return on investment and having the strategy. So my belief is really, in order to make sure that we're very clear about talent management moving forward, we do need to make sure that we measure it and that we assess the return on the investment so that we can prove its worth to shareholders. So you may disagree with me. I'd be quite interested to know if you do, but in my mind, in order for to be successful, talent management strategies need to be a number of these things. The one you may disagree with me on is the consistent, because I know a number of the clients have actually disagreed with me on that one. And just a parting thought, really. I think until talent management and human capital is seen as an asset or a differentiator in the market rather than something we have to do in order to keep people happy, then really the whole process is going to be fundamentally flawed. And I think there's some really great models, some great theories and some great approaches out there. It's just about making sure that we consistently communicate them from HR and talent down to the business so that they know how to do it. We found that in the last 5 years there's been a significant difference in organisations using consultancies. They bring us in as experts now rather than as a resource. They want us to upskill their managers to deliver all of these talent management applications themselves. And if we are able to, if we need to do that, we need to assume that those managers need the information to succeed. We can't keep having all of the information behind doors. Talent management should be an open strategy, not a closed one. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass you back to Colin, who'd like to close, and then we'll just do a few questions, if that's okay. Hopefully you have a few.
Let me invite questions now from the audience. I'd like you to put your hand up if you've got a question, and then we'll get the microphone to you so that everyone can hear your question as well as Amanda's answer. If you put your hand up if you want to, right, okay.
Lots of food for thought there, actually, but a question about your own personal experience of working with managers and what proportion of them you think are aware already of what their personal values are before you get to that discussion about whether they actually fit in with the organisational values.
Thank you. I think that Unless you give them a process for identifying their personal values, people find it very difficult to immediately define what they are. But through some simple questions, it can be quite easy to get to those values. And then they're able to assess whether they actually fit. So there's methods, values cards and so on, exercises you can do to assess personal values.
I've come across talent used in a very broad way, as in everyone in the organisation is talented and we should develop everyone.
Yeah.
And then I've also seen it used much more narrowly in terms of the high-performing or high-potential people. In terms of you talking to all these organisations, how generally nowadays is it defined?
It's really mixed. I completely agree, and I meant to mention the same thing, that organisations define talent in completely different ways. I would say there's probably a 30% that say everybody's talent, and 70% say that just the top few are talented and high potential. And it's when those organisations are talking about the top few that they don't tell them who they are, nor do they say the word talent in the corridor, because it's a rude word. I was actually told by one client, a global client, that I was not allowed to use that word talent in a meeting because it would turn off the business. Thank you.
Okay, no other questions, so I'd like to say thank you to Amanda for her time and her material. There's a band of happy helpers wearing these T-shirts on stand 309. So if you'd like a copy, to receive a copy of the paper, would you please make your way there and we'll get that to you. Thank you very much for your time.